Welcome everyone. My name's Richard Graham. I'm an Associate Director at Coeus, and I'll be sort of moderating and sort of guiding through this, which means I don't really have to talk with any knowledge about anything. I'm going to leave that to my colleagues, John, Vish and Simon. So the topic we're talking about today is why now is the right time to take your network to market. We've got a lot of experience in doing this with clients and seen a lot of success doing it with our clients. We will use a case study throughout today, which is E.ON, which hopefully you all have heard of. As a company, we've got permission to sort of use that. So we'll probably talk about E.ON a little bit too much maybe, but it's just because we're allowed to mention them by name. And it's also a great case study because we took them through right from strategy through sourcing through implementation, so right through an end-to-end engagement. I'd like to sort of introduce my colleagues now, or actually let them introduce themselves. So perhaps John, if I can start with you, and just you can talk about a little bit about your background and what you're going to talk about today. Sure.
So I'm an associate director responsible for a number of sectors within Coeus, but also been a sourcing advisory for over 20 years. So it's my pet subject, the sourcing angle on this anyway. I'm an accountant by background. I'm very enthusiastic for anything that's going to have a dramatic impact on the bottom line. And then with respect to E.ON, on that engagement, I led the RFP process through to contract signature, and then that was picked up. The other guys were involved and picked up and taken through to conclusion. So I know a lot about this topic.
Thanks a lot, John. Vish, you go next.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, hi everyone. Vish Patel. So I head up the technology and architecture capability at Coeus. Nearly 15 years plus working with technology. I've covered sort of the full breadth from application design, development, right through to a lot of what I do these days, which is more around sort of network infrastructure, telephony, cloud-based services, that sort of thing. So that's a little bit about me. In terms of E.ON, so similar to John, I was involved in that project. It was an end-to-end engagement for me. So I joined it right at the start along with John as part of the tendering through to contract signature. And then I worked alongside Simon, who will introduce himself later, in terms of the delivery and really being able to see the sort of the benefits that we'd outlined during the sort of the tender contracting phase, seeing that right through to fruition from a technology point of view. So yeah, excited to be here talking about the sort of the technology lens on the subject for today. Back over to you, Rich.
Great, Vish, thanks. And Simon, last but definitely not least.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Simon Reynolds, also an associate director with sector responsibility for energy and utilities. My background is projects and program management, been doing that approaching 25 years, which is scary to say. In terms of E.ON, worked with John as he handed over the sourcing negotiations, and with Vish, with the technology being decided to program manage that on E.ON's behalf, working alongside the outgoing and the incoming supplier. So know the delivery part of the case study very, very well.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Just before we sort of dive into the first area, which will be sort of the sort of strategic context and why now, a little bit of domestic. If you've got a question, anybody, please stick your hand up or pop it in the chat, and I'll drop it into the experts at the right point. Don't feel you have to wait. We can do it as we go. Also, there'll be time at the end to ask any questions you have. So we'd love to keep this nice and interactive, and we'll try and answer any questions that you have as we go. So I'll keep an eye out for hands popping up. There's a little icon to do that on Teams if you want to do that. So firstly, I'm going to sort of start with John, I guess, and say, you know, why is now the right time to think about retendering your network? What's different?
Yeah, I mean, you probably picked up the enthusiasm in my voice earlier. I mean, 20 years experience in sourcing. The one area of sourcing that's always really hard, has been traditionally very hard to get moving, has been the network space. There's been a lot of inertia there for a variety of understandable reasons. But right now, there's an unusual confluence of things happening, which are the technology is changing dramatically, or potentially and will do over the coming years. We're seeing cloudification of services, and this is really forcing organizations to rethink their network strategies. They can't just sort of keep adding bits on in a very tactical way. But beyond that, the marketplace is really becoming much more competitive than it ever has been. And for once, there's a really big, strong business case at the same time as the technologists want to get some new toys in play. So yeah, it's just the time is right, because the business case is there to do something, and really a lot of organizations can't afford to not do something. They've got to revisit their network strategy, and thankfully there's a business case to do that.
Great. And what do you think's historically stopped people in the past doing it? What's been the barriers to doing it?
Well, the real barriers I think are about the twofold really. One is the network is traditionally probably the most stable part of your IT services. 5 nines availability. It's critical to the business, so you don't really want to jeopardize that. And the other side of that is just the cost of change. If you change your network supply, you're going to have to re-procure a whole load of kit. You've got a big project to do that. You've got the potential for business disruption. So that the reasons not to do it have always been and remain very strong. But as I say, the technology and the cost are becoming strong enough drivers to make people rethink.
Great. So you think there's a sort of tipping point there where those barriers are outweighed by benefit, and perhaps that hasn't been true before?
I think that is the case. I mean, organizations need to be a bit brave and start out on that journey to convince themselves that it's a safe thing to do. Yeah, I think it has, and I think you've got to think about what's happening in the market as well. I mean, traditionally, what you've had is these incumbent telcos who have had decades-long engagements, delivering some cost savings, some incremental change, but not really challenged. And so I think most organizations that I speak to, they know they should do something. They know that some of those contracts are a bit lethargic and need overhauling. But it's not a trivial task to do that. And you've also got to look at the marketplace in terms of the players these days. So some of the sort of Eastern service providers, they've already shaken things up in infrastructure, and they're doing the same now in the network space and in other network communications. And then further out, you've got industry consolidation and new entrants. So the market's shifting around more than it has in a long time. I think I talked about incremental change, and perhaps the telco has been a bit complacent. Some of these new entrants are leading on transformation agenda, and that we found that certainly can outflank the incumbents who are surprised really that their clients might actually embrace some of that change. And there's just the price point. If the price point is compelling, people are gonna organizations need to react. And Vish is going to talk about technology later on, but the variety of impacts there in the technology space are also important, because they're on organization agendas. So SD-WAN, what does it mean? What can it deliver? Is it real? Looking at cost and whether you really need the sort of all singing, all dancing, full MPLS setup that you've had in the past. As I say, cloudification, the nature and volume of network traffic is changing. So the thing that you built and then made tactical changes to really may not be fit for purpose anymore. And of course, the biggie that makes it a C-level agenda item is that's cybersecurity, and the technology has an angle there as well, in terms of maybe answering some of those questions and building in assurance of the future. So yeah. There's a lot of catalysts around that force people to look at this question that, you know, let's be honest, it would be quite nice not to have to look at when you've got a nice stable service.
Yeah. So sort of perfect confluence of factors there, really.
It is, and not, typically what you get with new technology is the new technology has an unproven or unlikely business case, and it doesn't get that support.
Yeah. And before we sort of hand over to Vish, who's going to maybe talk a bit more about the tech and the possibilities that offers, just talk a bit more about the go-to-market process and sort of how that works, because it is a complex topic with lots of moving parts. So maybe just walk through that at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, in terms, there's no magic here. I mean, it's IT service procurement like anything else, and you've got to go through a rigorous process. I think the standout differences for me would be, first of all, having the right suppliers in the room. You know, having a mix of systems integrators, telcos, and maybe even other cloud service offerings, because that could change the landscape that you're trying to procure. And once you've got the right people in the room, and that, sorry, it also includes, to be honest, some of the technology providers, because understanding where the technology is and is going is almost as important as who's going to implement it and run it for you. Another important factor, it's not necessarily a difference, but it's got a higher emphasis, is the need for a real interactive engagement in the process. You want to test the art of the possible, because some of these things are very nascent, and bits of it are proven, bits of it aren't proven, bits of it are likely to be needed later. And what do you do now? And then you've got to spend the time to make sure that what solutions are being put in front of you really do fit with your strategy, your appetite for risk, and have, you know, proven use cases that you can point to that demonstrate that you're not going to spend a load of money for no good reason, or jeopardize your business. So I think the interactive dimension is more heightened than it would be in more
and that was
other services.
That, obviously at Eon was sort of used to great effect when we did the work at Eon, right? Yeah.
I mean, we had it was an awful lot of interactive workshops with the suppliers to sort of, for them to present, you know, some really quite innovative change, but then for us to test it and feedback and come to the right balance of ambition. The other thing I'd say that's very important to think about in terms of going to market is just think about the transition itself. You know, if it's a big complex network, it will take time to transition. You do need to worry about the business impacts, and so you need to plan that time into your process. So, you know, basically engage the market early. Don't leave yourself too tight a cliff edge at the end. I mean, at Eon we had a very clear deadline for the contractual piece, and that was challenging. But so I guess that's my key word of advice to anyone: act a bit earlier than you think you need to.
Great, thanks, John. So I guess, you know, we've maybe touched on technology innovation, but not dived into that really. So Vish, maybe if I hand over to you to perhaps talk about what technologies now should companies be considering in terms of their network, you know, that perhaps weren't there before, or perhaps they haven't considered yet.
Yeah. So Rich, happy to talk about that. So I think there's a number of different technologies that certainly we're having conversations with our clients. So I mean, the big one is SD-WAN at the moment, and so has been the case over the last few years. You know, SD-WAN has been the buzzword within networking. But when we look at the timing of it, now feels like the right time, where sort of the maturity of the solutions, the business demand and the need to change, and as John said, sort of the business case are really coming together to make it something which we're seeing more traction of. So we're seeing more deployments of SD-WAN technology within the organization, and I'll talk a little bit in a bit more detail later about some of the things that you need to consider there. You know, there's a whole raft of opportunity that technologies like SD-WAN deliver. But now feels like the right time where where organizations can start to look at deploying those technologies into their estate. There's other things like cloud brokerage, cloud exchange points. So again, John touched on the fact that a lot of organizations are moving more and more of their use cases and workloads into the cloud. So actually the kind of the old topology of having central data centers where all of the traffic comes into, where security policies and effectively routing decisions as to where that traffic needs to go are made. That topology is out the water now, because actually what we're finding is that organizations are becoming very they're not able to be reactive by having all of the data flowing into a central point and for it to just break out to the internet. So we're seeing a lot of discussions around cloud brokerage. How do we connect to the different cloud providers that we have? AWS, Azure, another. So we're definitely seeing a lot of design decisions being made around how do they connect to cloud providers, and also the wider software as a service vendors as well. Organizations are looking at Teams, Zoom, HR systems in the cloud, Workday. You're seeing SAP HANA type implementations, which are all in the cloud. So actually, it makes a lot of sense to start to look at these things holistically and seeing how these different considerations and technologies will sort of deliver the outcomes that organizations need to be looking at. And I've been talking a lot about the kind of the network, but actually traditionally things like your telephony, things like your video conferencing, things like your streaming services, they've always fallen in the domain of networks. And actually a lot of clients are sort of coming to us and saying, well, actually, where do these sit now, right? Because a lot of this is just IP traffic, right? Gone are the days where organizations are procuring boxes, PBXs, circuits, tin. Those days are gone. We're now looking at IP traffic, and actually a lot of these traditional technologies which sat in the domain of networks are just becoming applications, and as a result of that, I think there are implications in terms of how the organizations deliver those services internally to its customers that need to be considered. So I think those are the main kind of areas that we're talking to clients about. I mean, the big wrap around this is also security, right? As I mentioned, moving away from the need to have everything consolidated or tromboning into a central place where security policy and controls are applied, brings new challenges, because actually, how do I apply a consistent security stance across my organization when I've now got local internet breakouts? I've got people with mobiles that are accessing cloud services directly. So I think there's a lot that needs to be considered there. And the final thing to say on this is, all of this has a big knock-on impact in terms of how the traditional IT organization is structured, and the sort of service model that needs to be in place to deliver these solutions internally, but also with respect to the to the scoping of the work that you're giving to outsourced providers, right? Gone are the days where it's fully managed services, tin, circuits, and the management. A lot of these solutions are now bringing in a level of complexity and a level of layers, which gives organizations the opportunity to be quite selective about which bits go where. So a mixture of sort of technology type discussions, but also discussions about how organizations need to react and structure themselves in order to go to market.
Great. And just talk maybe a bit more about, some of the cons maybe, or the negatives, or if you can. I guess we've talked a lot about what's great about this technology, and what are the challenges, what are maybe some of the negatives with it that people should at least watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long journey. I think that's always the key thing for me. I mean, if we pick on something like SD-WAN, right, it's been around for a while. We've talked a lot about it, but the marketplace is certainly maturing. There's different vendors with different propositions, but the market is still also trying to find the actual services, the use cases where which will deliver the biggest bang for its buck. And the key thing there is that it is a long journey. It's not something with a lot of these technologies. It's not something that we can just sort of execute a 1-year transition plan and you go from sort of CMO, your current mode of operation, to FMO. There's a really long journey there, and the sort of the advice we give to our clients is, take a step back and think about what are those use cases that's really going to deliver that kind of the step change for your organization, and focus on proving those use cases first with the implementation of the new technologies before you then extend that further. So absolutely, it's a long journey, and Simon will talk a lot about sort of the considerations from a project program management point of view. But also, if I think about some of the other cons from an SD-WAN perspective, one of the big promises is around, cost points, the flexibility that you'll have with regard to being able to manage your costs, being able to flex up, flex down as the business demand changes. But actually, one of the things we need to realize is that perhaps that last mile technology isn't quite there yet in order for us to be able to deliver the true benefits of something like SD-WAN. So I think we still need to be cognizant of the fact that, these technologies are still based on physics, right? You still need, wire in the ground, or you need the ability to have, high bandwidth connections to, over 4G, 5G. So be aware of those constraints that still apply. And finally, I think one of the biggest cons and one of the biggest considerations is around the sort of the complexity that this delivers. I mean, if you look at something like an SD-WAN technology, and I kind of touched on this earlier, what you're effectively doing, you're starting to split the underlay and overlay from a network perspective out into two. So actually, one of the key principles and one of the key strengths is that actually your transport just becomes a commodity, right? You can, that can be a bit of expensive MPLS, that can be a bit of cheap internet connection, that could be a 4G connection, and really it's about bringing all of those underlay technologies together with an overlay which acts as the sort of the virtual facade of making it seem like a traditional MPLS type connection. So actually this is starting to bring in more complexity, because all of this then needs to be managed and delivered back into the organization. So don't underestimate the complexity that this brings, and the sort of the thought and consideration that needs to go into how you will then change in order to kind of realize the benefits of this technology.
So yeah, it sounds like, sort of paraphrasing you and John, there's a bit of a sweet shop out there, but you need to work out which bits of it fit the benefit case you're driving for your business, and also
absolutely
at what pace can you run at that, and that you shouldn't underestimate the journey that is, which is a nice segue, I guess, into Simon, who has got the war wounds of taking a contract, a shiny contract, and making it reality. So Simon, I guess, you can talk about the implementation. I guess what are the common pitfalls, or how do you assure the success of something once it's written in a contract? How do you make that real?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think the first thing to do is actually to carry on where John finished off when he was talking about time, and I couldn't emphasize this more. The sourcing process, I mean, we've seen it, 7-year deal, 2 years before the end of it. Company considers going to market, spend 6 months thinking about it, 6 to 12 months actually running the sourcing process. That leaves 6 to 12 months to deliver, which, coming back to what Vish was saying, depending on the complexity and depending on what you're looking to achieve and transform, isn't long enough. And there are 2 or 3 considerations there. One is the starting earlier, of thinking about it earlier, and whether you're looking to transform and transition. If you are looking to transform and you're looking to improve and take on things like SD-WAN or more SaaS or whatever it may be, that could take longer because it's more complex and there are more changes to the business that are required. So the consideration of those. If you decide, because of a time frame, you're going to transition, and we've seen this with companies where they decide they're going to transition and then transform afterwards, is consider the complexity of doing that. because once the contract is actually in place and it's in business as usual, and the project structure has gone away and the governance gone away, actually trying to deliver transformation afterwards is incredibly difficult, because other things have started to move on. And we saw it with E.ON, with SD-WAN. It wasn't part of the original consideration. It was brought in later, and it was run separately, but it was seen as being an extra complexity. So there's both of those. There's also just considering the supplier. If you put pressure, enough pressure on a supplier, and you say, can you deliver it within a given time frame? Suppliers will tend to say, yes, we can do, but then there's a lot of considerations there. And I think there's probably a physics thing here about the amount of pressure you put on a supplier to say that they can deliver in a time frame, then has to sort of relate out in terms of the achievability and the realistic nature of that plan, and that needs to be tested. So the solution to this really is to start earlier. If you can't and you need to accelerate, then consider what that will mean. So if you are accelerating, can you transform as well? What are the key things you need to transform? What are the things you'll bring forward? What are the things you'll push out to later? What are the things that you need to achieve your business case and your benefit case? And also, I would involve your delivery team as early as possible. It can't be that old traditional thing of a finance department runs a sourcing deal and then they give it over to delivery and then delivery picks it up. It can't work. It won't work in terms of this complexity. And as Vish said, all of the different considerations are changing these days. So the earlier you can involve the people who know how complex it's going to be, which then leads probably into the second thing, which is stakeholders. Stakeholders include your business, they include your security, they include maybe you've got different countries, understanding the complexities in the different countries. We've seen it with rules and regulations across different countries in Europe where you can and you can't do things compared to others. Certain restrictions, Sweden's got HASI, different countries have got different things, so bringing all of those in. So I won't go into governance, because obviously within project management, governance is something which you would assume, but as part of that time, make sure you understand the complexities. And Vish said it, you've still got to put a cable in the ground, or you've still got to put a satellite dish on somebody's roof. And if you don't own that, sometimes they won't let you on the roof to do it. And that is an actual case. We saw that, and that causes problems. I think the other thing is also, and it does come to that time complexity, is probably your starting point. So where are you going from and to? So first generation outsourcing, you might be going out for the first time. You might have consideration of moving of staff. At least then the knowledge will move with those staff, so you haven't got to worry about that, but that changes your operating model. If it's second generation outsourcing, then you may have lost that knowledge, you may have lost that staff, so there'll be more time on knowledge transfer, but hopefully you've already got the operating models in place. So again, understanding each of those elements then can come into your thinking and can come into working with the supplier even before they start delivering, which is why, as I say, bring the delivery team in earlier. And also things around data and understanding what data there is, what exists, whether it's quality data. If you've got countries, you've got business units, do you have that centrally, or do they have their own data? Do you understand what it is you're moving? All of those kind of different things come in. And one example that we saw was with actually not the E.ON business case, but a renewable energy company. They decided in terms of that knowledge transfer and first gen outsourcing to use a third party company. That third party company were midway through knowledge transfer when actually they looked at the data and they said the gap is too large, and they decided to step away, which caused a big gap in terms of how that gets completed. And that, again, was because they didn't understand the challenge before they actually got this other third party engaged. The final thing, and the thing that always impacts every project, but we saw this very much with E.ON, is the understanding of your current environment. So in terms of your actual cost, especially if you're going from first generation to second or third to fourth, whatever it may be, is what are you actually paying for all of those services? And are they all in the master services? Are they all in one place? Do you understand those? And John, you felt the pain of this, where you've got multiple different services, some in the core contract, some inside contracts, some which have been written in countries, and understanding that overall, because your business case and the delivery of the business case has to understand each of those and all of those. And We've seen a case where there was a cost element which wasn't understood. It was then seen as being an impact on the business case, but actually it wasn't an impact on the business case because it wasn't known about. So the cost just transferred from one to the other. So again, having that overall transparency and understanding. So a lot of complex things to think about. A lot of other areas I could go into, I'm sure, but I think those are the core considerations that I'd put forward at this stage.
Thanks, Simon. So yeah, lots to think about. And I think it's, the old adages around, preparation and time and early engagement, stakeholder management, all will ring true when doing something on this scale. So we've sort of talked a little bit about the sort of pitfalls throughout a little bit, but I want to sort of circle back because I guess we opened up by saying, well, we think right now it's worth it, right? So perhaps if I could ask each of you, so let's talk about some of the key outcomes, key benefits. We can talk financial, we can talk capability, business capability. So perhaps I open it up to the floor there from the three of you to just chip in with outlining some of the actual benefits that were in the end realized for E.ON in doing this.
Yeah, I mean, in E.ON's case, E.ON's case was an interesting one where they had their incumbent was another German utility, and that German utility, when asked to consider their pricing for next generation deal, said, "Oh no, the price is going to have to go up considerably," which was, in retrospect, was a fairly dumb thing for them to do. And I think the account team probably believed whatever they were being told in terms of their pricing objectives. What turned out to be the case was, I can't remember the percentage, but it must have been around 30-odd% savings, multi-million euro savings, at the same time as a transformed service. So that decision by the German utility, the German telco, not to offer something competitive, was a key catalyst for this program to go ahead. But yeah, so I think that for me, that's it. It's if you've got a long-standing contract, you could have an account manager there telling you, "Oh no, this is bleeding me dry" from the telco side, and you really need to take them to market to expose what's possible. And if you're brave enough to go on that journey, I think if it's a long-standing contract, you'll make considerable savings. I know Vish is involved with a large international financial services company, and I was involved early on in that. They did change incumbents more recently, but even then I think Vish will tell us. I mean, I think there's still very good savings to go at. But the longer that incumbent's been in place, the higher the savings you can expect, notwithstanding the benefits from technology that will be overlaid on top.
Fiona's got a question, so yeah, feel free to chip in right now. You're on mute at the moment.
Just wanting to push John on. He said significant savings. Do you think in the region of 20 to 40%? Are you thinking 40 to 60%? And I know obviously everybody's contract's different, but just from a ballpark, if, for example, I'm happy to share, we renegotiated our current contracts a couple of years ago and got a reduction because they were, in my mind, extortionate. But if you've got a 2-year deal that hasn't been changed for a long time, in my mind, it's 20 to 40%, but I don't know whether if I'm in the right ballpark or whether I should be thinking about more or being more conservative.
I think that for planning, I'd go at that sort of level. I think that there is certainly E.ON. I wish I had the percentages to hand. E.ON was more than that, but there was a lot within that. There was a network that hadn't really been reconfigured in a long time, so there are opportunities to rationalise the network within the savings. So if your network's not going to change, I think 20 to 40%. Fundamentally, what it needs to do isn't going to change. Something in the region of 20 to 40% just on margin is probably the right sort of target. But if you've got an overhaul and transformation,
include the sort of SIP telephony charges as well, or is that just looking at the network itself?
Yeah, we haven't really talked much about the scope of E.ON. It was very broad. It covered the data, covered telephony, covered call centers, covered webcasting, covered Vish, remind me what else it covered. I mean, it was
video conferencing. I think you covered most of them.
Yeah. So unified comms. I mean, it was a very broad remit. And yes, I mean, the headline's the clearest thing to report back, but I guess the big savings probably were in the network space.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the SIP bit, Fiona, I guess for me it really depends on where you're coming from. So if you really have got a traditional telephony infrastructure based on ISDN 30s or whatever, then absolutely moving to SIP is going to be a real step change, both in.
We've already done that, so
right.
I'm just trying to say we've renegotiated our SIP.
Yeah.
We've got good pricing as of 2 years ago. Again, not wanting to bore everybody else with my personal setup, but we've got a lot of duplication, and we've got a kind of hub and spoke network. It's wrong for where we need to be.
Yeah. No, and I think the opportunities, maybe if I look at pure telephony, are less so in perhaps the real unit charges coming down from a SIP point of view, but more in the opportunities more from a transformational perspective. I think there's bigger cost savings in terms of operational savings and things like that by moving away from traditional kind of ISDN based to SIP. So yeah, I think, have we lost Fiona there?
I think she might have frozen, but yeah, okay. Thanks, Vish. Kure, you've got a question. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi, this is Kure. Hi, maybe it's a little bit generic compared to the EON case, but as we know, for the OSS BSS landscapes, we have enough of application portfolio assessment and rationalization frameworks on the market, which assess the legacy applications from the both technical and functional maturity point of view, like ETOM and TM-FROM. But what's your view regarding the network modernization compared to full network transformation, which could be costly for the operator? And for example, has there been a concrete framework for that kind of network assessment and modernization, whether to modernize, retain, retire, or enhance the network? And any working business case document that we have, for example, in the market, it is really working and respected at the client side. I mean, from the application point of view, I'm okay, but from the network modernization point of view, I'm not sure about that kind of framework. So that's what I'm trying to understand as a consultant.
Yeah, let me just see if I can paraphrase your question. So, so is there some sort of framework by which you can assess someone's network components or areas of the network to say, are these, strategic or should be retired or what have you? Is that your question? Exactly, compared to an application portfolio assessment based on the legacy applications. And any kind of sort of maturity, capability maturity model or standard. I'll throw it to the group. I don't know of one, but the guys may well do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, actually. Again, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of one, but I mean, the approach we tend to take is to look more in terms of starting with the business outcomes, in terms of what the organizations are looking to achieve, because I think, if we look at sort of the technologies that I'm talking about with regard to SD-WAN, with regard to zero trust networking, with regard to more work being put into the cloud, that's really changing, if you like, the reason for that change is to deliver particular business outcomes, right? Whether it be agility, whether it be cost savings, it's really there to try and deliver a business strategy, and that's typically where we start from. I mean, if I look at some of my clients, so I've got a financial services client. We went into that with we want SD-WAN. That was the remit. But actually, what we very quickly found out, in fact, is that what they need in order for them to deliver the business outcomes isn't necessarily a big overhaul of their network. It's smaller changes and being able to lay some of the underlying foundations with regard to moving to carrier neutral facilities, moving towards virtual CPE infrastructure, these sorts of things which would give them more bang for their buck with regard to what it is that they need to achieve, rather than a big overhaul. So yeah, so Coeus, I think just trying to kind of link that back to your answer. I have to admit, I'm not aware of a framework. In terms of the approach we tend to take is less in terms of executing against the framework, but really looking at the business outcomes that organizations are looking to achieve, and then trying to translate that into the, kind of the underlying technology principles, and then considering that from a sort of both from an op model point of view, from a technology perspective, and therefore what the sourcing strategy needs to be. That tends to be the approach we take.
Okay, I get it. I mean, as far as I understand, a network modernization requirements are more concrete compared to an application portfolio. I mean, compared to an OSS BSS transformation project.
Yeah.
Because in those cases, it's all about you have to touch base with the processes and the applications and data, which is more obsolete compared to a network modernization.
Yeah.
Requirement.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that.
No problem.
Okay. We've got sort of 15 minutes or so left, but I guess if there are no further questions, we certainly won't keep people for the full hour. So I think we've sort of cantered through most of the subjects and the sort of end to end. Just any further closing remarks from my three colleagues, I guess, but I'll hand over if there's anything final to say that you've not got off your chest yet.
I mean, for me, Rich, it's from a technology point of view, it's often exciting. I think John said to kind of be able to play with new toys and trying to kind of get change in the organization, especially when you've been in a very stagnant place. But the thing I would say is, don't just jump in with your eyes closed, right? It's not necessarily a bad answer to say the right answer is to stop and pause, right? Seek advice, engage the market, understand exactly where, what the market's doing, what other organizations are doing as well, because actually what you'll soon find out is that, especially with some of the newer technologies or some of the technologies which aren't proven yet, we're all in the same game, right? The suppliers are still trying to figure out what their service propositions to their clients are going to be based on, the challenges that the clients have. And often clients are going out to the market expecting, solutions off the shelf. So don't be afraid to pause, seek advice, engage the market, and consider exactly what the right steps are for your own organization, because really there isn't one size fits all in this game.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it's really important to go through your own learning curve to prepare yourself well for this exercise and not get on a train that you haven't chosen the destination of. So yeah, I think that's very sound advice from Vish.
And I think adding to that and echoing part of that, don't let the complexity in terms of the change put you off, because actually all of the things which we've covered are manageable, and there is benefit itself in finding out what your incumbent supplier is doing and where your data's up to and what's happening and what's out in the marketplace. So it's a good process from that point of view, and it is achievable, and we've managed it with a number of clients now. So I think going back to sort of the top in terms of why now, it is something that can be done. All the benefits are there. So yeah, let's do it.
Great, thanks very much, Simon. I think I was waiting to see if Fiona had another question, but I think her battery just ran out and she's back. So I think unless there's anything further from anyone, you guys have done a great sort of job wrapping up for me. I don't really have to do that. In summary, yes, there are some challenges, but there's this perfect confluence now of new technology, of new vendors in the marketplace who are hungry for business. And tried and trusted approaches to doing stuff and delivering benefit, and the benefits are significant if you go at it. So if anyone else wants to talk more to us about this, wants a one-to-one that talk more in specific challenges, that would be great, and we'll have to speak. I think I've got maybe one more question from Coeus. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand whether you have offered the client the net DevOps way of working? Was it in the original offer? That's what I was trying to understand. I mean, was it in your scope? Net DevOps.
As in the net DevOps, as in a way, so as in a way of the vendor working. Is that the question?
Yep, correct. I mean, the development and operations of the network after the full transformation or the modernization.
Maybe the guys can talk. I mean, we haven't really touched an operating model, or Vish did a little bit. So maybe just a couple of sentences around how that worked for Eon.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, that's a topic in itself, Coeus. So it's quite a large topic. I think at Eon it ended up being more of a traditional setup that they had there. So as Simon was saying, we did look at things like SD-WAN, that was effectively roadmapped, and that's actually they're currently on that journey at the moment. I think things like SD-WAN and the ability to have the separation of the overlay and the underlay is really important there, right? Because actually the net DevOps is you need a lot of that automation and orchestration in place in order for you to be able to achieve that, right? Traditional network changes are done through very manual processes almost, right? And actually trying to augment that way of working or that operating model from a supplier side into more of a faster pace of change through kind of trying to take the DevOps that we've seen in the application space and some elements of infrastructure into networks is very difficult. So a lot of that, almost for me, it's around having those prerequisites of the virtualization of the infrastructure to then have the flexibility of your underlay, all wrapped with the intelligent overlay, is what's required as almost a bit of a foundational building block on which you can then have all of your automation running. But that journey is a long journey because actually there's a lot that needs to happen internally within organizations to achieve that, whether it's through governance and approval cycles, having control of the data, being able to have all of the telemetry in place across the organization for the network to be able to react. There's a lot of that journey is a long one in my opinion.
That's great.
I don't know whether that's something that you've seen and whether that resonates with you.
No, yeah, I got the answer. Yeah, I mean, in DevOps is any case, it requires some organizational changes, which would be not easy from the first day on. So, and net DevOps is a very new topic. So, I was just trying to understand whether you offered that one to the client or not. Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Any final questions before we close off? Doesn't look like it. So thanks to everyone for joining. I hope you found that useful, interesting. There will be a recording of it, which we'll get up somewhere to rewatch or share, hopefully. And as I said, if anyone else wants a one-to-one or wants to explore topics further with any of the experts, specifically, please do reach out to Charlotte or me or any of them individually. But otherwise, we'll close it there and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.